Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I'm Nathanael Rutherford here with Gene Henley. We want to thank all of you for tuning in, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on the podcast app of choice you use, like Apple Podcast, Google, Spotify, wherever it is. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube here, please hit subscribe and like this video as well. And if you're not subscribed to our podcast, it's your first time listening, then thank you so much for tuning in. Please go ahead and subscribe today. And it's about to be March Madness, Gene. We were just talking about how February, the end of it is sneaking up on us because it's, for one, it's the shortest month of the year. But for two, it's just time is flying right now. And we're near the end of February and March is about to be here. So we're, as I like to call it, play off the words of our own title here, the February fever that is leading into March Madness is upon us. And we have plenty to talk about for Tennessee, Gene. The Vols, since last time you and I spoke after the Kentucky win, Tennessee's gone and played a couple games, lost to Arkansas on the road, and then beat Missouri on the road. And finally, Tennessee got an easy road victory and got an actually easy team to play on the road. Seemed like all of Tennessee's road opponents this year, for the most part, have been pretty difficult and pretty tough environments to play in. Was not a tough environment to play in Columbia. The announced crowd was like just over 7,000. They didn't have that many in that arena. But Tennessee goes on the road and gets an easy victory, almost wire to wire. Missouri had an early lead. Tennessee took it back pretty quickly. We got the win 80-61 there. But Gene, the one I want to get to eventually, I want to start off on a little bit more of a positive note, is the Arkansas game where Tennessee lost that one 58-48. But first, let's go to the Missouri game here, the most recent one, because I don't think there's a lot that I really can take away from this one, because Missouri is just not a good team offensively or defensively. Like, they're in the bottom 130 on efficiency, or not bottom 130, excuse me, they're ranked 130 or worse on both offensive and defensive efficiency on KenPom. But the biggest thing for me in this game was, for one, Kenny Chandler had another phenomenal game. 23 points, 8 rebounds for his 6-foot self. It's pretty impressive. 6 assists and 0 turnovers and 2 steals. The assist to turnover ratio is what really impresses me. He's had now 2 of his last 3 games. He's had 6+ assists and 0 turnovers, and he had, I think, 2 assists and 2 turnovers against Arkansas. So over his last 3 games, he's had 14 assists and 2 turnovers total, which that's a very nice margin. It seems like he's kind of coming along and really starting to hit a groove. But Gene, the big thing that stood out to me from this game was that Victor Bailey Jr. had himself his best game of the season easily. Played 18 minutes, was 5 of 8 from the floor, including making his only 3 he attempted. His energy, Gene, he's been a good energy guy off the bench for Tennessee anyway, but I mean, his energy in that whole game, defensively and everything, he was just, I mean, he was balling out in this game. And it was nice to see him finally have a good game against, a quality opponent, because I think he had like 14 points in an earlier game this year, but if I remember correctly, it was against a low major team or mid-major team, whatever you want to call it. But really, to me, Victor Bailey Jr. was the big standout. And the fact that Tennessee's post players didn't have a great game, and Tennessee still found a way to actually score points in the paint and score points outside the 3. Because Tennessee only attempted 18 threes in the game. Granted, they were 9 of 18, so they're 50%. But they managed 34 points in the paint with Urosh not having a great game, Braden Hatfield not doing great, Jonas Adu great defensively, but he was 1 of 8 from the floor. And Fulkerson only played 6 minutes because he hurt his hip in the Arkansas game and wasn't doing a whole lot there. Even with that, though, Tennessee had a lot of drives to the bucket, had a good amount of fast break points. Again, it's against Missouri, so I'm kind of like, I'm not taking away a whole lot of it, but there were some things in this game that I saw that, it was nice to see someone step up when Tennessee needed someone to step up, and Victor Bailey Jr., because they needed another spark off the bench, because Ziegler wasn't having his typical kind of, his typical impact off the bench, and he still had a decent impact, but especially early on. But really, I mean, Victor Bailey was kind of the big standout in this game for me, and the fact that Tennessee didn't play down the competition. I mean, we've seen it multiple times. I mean, Auburn barely beat Missouri. If you're going to look at it there, they beat them like 55-54. They definitely played down the competition in that respect. And Missouri is notorious for being able to kind of get the other team in the mud. So goes Tennessee where they deserve. They got almost a 20-point win on the road, and they didn't really look all that bothered during the game.
Yeah, and I think going forward, it's good to have options because, like I know that the whole Bailey Powell thing has just always been such a, I don't want to say a hot button issue, but it's been something that a lot of people have tried to take note of because, people have grown weary of Victor Bailey, and everybody wants to see the new guy. But, Justin Powell had become the backup quarterback on a football team that's struggling. Yeah. You want to see that kid out there. You need him. You need him. You want him. You need him. But, if there are still some things that Powell has to work on because there's a difference between, I understand that they, that Rick Barnes, they kind of mentioned that they kind of rolled with the hot hand last night. But if they trust you, you're going to find yourself into the court. It just may be in some sort of different rotation. A lot, maybe, perhaps with Victor Bailey. And so I don't think it's like overly concerning. I think it's more of a credit to, just kind of the night that Bailey had, hitting shots, defending. He was a plus 16 in 18 minutes, which looks like it's pretty much like per minute the best on the team. And that's really good to see for him because, you have guys like basketball's a long season and you're going to have, there's going to be moments where you need different guys to kind of step up. Like you can't always you can hope that the right guys step up every single game. It doesn't always work that way. You're going to have contributions from guys coming off the bench. And, in this particular game, it was Victor Bailey who had a really good performance. And if you can get something mirroring that performance, going forward, and then perhaps you get another really good shooting game against Auburn, because I'd imagine there's nobody that wants to have the good game against Auburn as much as Victor Bailey. I'm sorry, as Justin Powell. You never know. Like to be able to get one good performance out of one of those two guys is key. I mean, you talked about Chandler. There's not much you can say when you're making shots, you're not turning the ball over, and you're rebounding well. Vescovi's going to do what he does. That's never going to change. It may look different from time to time, but basically, if you give him an open shot, just go ahead and just turn back around and walk, run down court because that's 3 points. You're going to get points in the paint if you attack the basket, and you've got guys, Chandler, Ziegler, guys like that who are very aggressive off the bounce and can get to the basket. And so those paint points count too. You didn't get the performances, from your bigs, but you still got it, and you did what you were supposed to do, which is beat down an inferior team, which is good. As a dog barks in the background here. But yeah, I think going forward, that's good. I mean, you got the performances that you needed to get out of the guys you need to get good performances out of. And again, Adu, struggling to hit shots, but he does everything else. Like, again, that's a kid who's going to take a year or two to develop as an offensive player because he's being asked to do something he's never been asked to do before. 1 of 8 last night, not great, but he was also plus 18 in 23 minutes, and that looks like that's the second best on the team behind Vescovi. Not all stats are the same, and a kid can put up a great scoring performance and be a net negative. Yep. So it's great to see that pretty much for the second or not the second consecutive game, but for the second straight week that you and I have talked on this podcast, Adu is coming off a solid performance because, we all know what he did last week against Kentucky, and he certainly had a pretty solid performance last night. Yeah,
I am not to get ahead of ourselves here, but I am like his biggest test is going to be that Auburn game because it's not just one guy with Oscar Sheboy. You've got to contend with Walker Kessler, who is the premier shot blocker in all of college basketball, and Jabari Smith, because both those guys are, Smith is a little more versatile. He does shoot from the perimeter and shoot mid-range, but clearly he's 6'10" post who's going to attack the paint too. That's going to be Adu's biggest test. He played 23 minutes against Missouri. You mentioned 1 of 8 from the floor, 5 points, but 5 boards, 3 blocks in that game as well. Even over the weekend against Arkansas, didn't have the blocks, but he did go out there for 17 minutes in that game, 6 boards, 4 points, and had an even split of 3 offensive rebounds and 3 defensive rebounds in that game. So this is going to be his biggest test. He's been a guy who's been consistently getting 15, 20 minutes in a game, and I think that's been I like that minute distribution for him. I think that's a great. He's been. I mean, to me, he's been Tennessee's best post player over the last, I guess, 3 games. I mean, well, I guess Fulkerson was the best offensive player against Kentucky from the post because of what he was able to do when he's healthy and offensively against a guy who he matched up with really well against Oscar Tshiebwe. But now he's hurt. And we've seen from the past with Fulkerson that he doesn't always do the best of playing when he's hurt, which, that's fine. Like not everybody heals the same. Not everybody is able to do the same things when they're injured. But it just seems like Fulkerson, especially during his long storied tenure at Tennessee, isn't the greatest at being able to, kind of brush off injury and play well when he's hurt. And that's why he only played 6 minutes against Missouri. And, he's 1 of 1 and had 2 points and 3 fouls in the 6 minutes he was out there. But that's what I think looking ahead to the Auburn game is most intriguing to me is how Adu does against those other post players that Auburn's going to have. That's going to be Tennessee's, the 2 best post players Tennessee have faced this entire season. I mean, you could maybe throw in the Arizona guys or maybe the Villanova guys, but I would put in Kessler and Jabari as the top 2. And how does Brandon Huntley Hatfield, how does Urosh do against those guys? But that we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I think, you make good points and kind of basically, I mean, building off what I said, what you said for the Missouri game, I don't want to talk too much about it because it's Missouri. They're now 10-18. That was their 12th loss of the season, Gene, of double digits. And they had a game earlier this year. I don't think you and I talked about it, where they lost to Arkansas, and quite literally Arkansas with their halftime score, they could have gone the entire rest of the second half of that game and not scored a single point, and it has still have beaten Missouri because they won that game 87-43, and I think they had 44. Arkansas had 44 or 45 points at halftime, and they doubled up Missouri's score and beat them by 44 in that game. So I mean, this is the Missouri team. It's also the same Missouri team that they beat Alabama. They've been a weird team, but they're not good overall. They don't have a true point guard. They don't really have a post player besides Kobe Brown, and he's 6'7". So I mean, it's like they just don't have a lot of pieces right now, and they haven't had pieces all season. So I want to go back a little bit, and I know it's more of a negative topic, but sorry guys, it's just how this podcast is going to go. I'm not feeling negative about it. I don't feel, this is not going to be a negative bashing Tennessee episode. I guess what I'm trying to say, but Gene, let's go back a little bit to the Arkansas game here where Tennessee lost that one on the road 58-48. Lowest scoring output of the season for Tennessee. They could not buy a shot, especially from 3. They finished that game 4 of 24 from 3, which is 17%. They shot barely above 25% from the field. Didn't get to the free throw line a whole lot. They were 12 of 18 as a team, but that's a little skewed because you look at the rest of the team. The team as a whole did a good job shooting free throws. It was Urosh that brought everything down. He was 0 of 4 from the free throw line. The rest of the team was 12 of 14. So I mean, really, the team did a good job shooting free throws. It was just Urosh that stunk that number up for Tennessee. But Gene, my thing from that game, there were a lot of reactions online from that game, and rightfully so because the team stunk it up. But you also had a lot of reaction to myself. That game, the officiating, Gene, was not all one-sided. That was all garbage, and Tennessee got jobbed by the officials because I do think they got some really bad calls go against them, especially in the block charges. Those officials were bad on both sides. I mean, Arkansas fans, if they had lost that game, they would have had just as much to gripe about. Maybe not just as much, but they would have had a lot to gripe about, in my opinion, on their side of the ball too, because they got some pretty iffy and bad calls against them. But you look at the foul discrepancy. I mentioned this in my breakdown piece before the game, that Arkansas had a huge foul advantage at home this entire year. So it wasn't just this referee, this I guess the crew they had in this game, but they've had they've done a good job all year of kind of drawing fouls, but they'd had a massive advantage in free throw attempts and in fouls called against them versus fouls called against the opponent at home the entire year, and specifically in SEC play. And that held true on Saturday against Tennessee. Tennessee goes whistle for 24 fouls You had Josiah Jordan-James foul out. You had Kennedy Chandler and Vescovy both have 4 fouls. But you had those 3 get in foul trouble like quickly. And those 3 who were Tennessee's most, those 3 played the most minutes for Tennessee. And those 3 had to sit for, longer than they normally do. And it kind of disrupted their rhythm on offense. Basically, Gene, what I'm looking at and what I'm saying is that as I guess as ugly as the offense was, and as many things you can say about the officiating in this game, I wasn't that discouraged from the loss. It was disappointing because they lost, and there's a golden opportunity there because Auburn had just lost. As Tennessee was tipping off, that the game was going over before Tennessee and Arkansas was the Auburn game where they lost to Florida, and there's a golden opportunity for Tennessee to win and move within a game of the top spot in the SEC to stay tied with Kentucky. And you lose it and you fall back to 4th, but you're still in the top 4. You still have you're still basically on lock for a top 4 seed in the double bye. And you're playing this team again in the regular season finale in your own home court and have a chance to, have your home environment be just as loud and rowdy as Bud Walton was. And you're not going to be playing. People are saying, oh, this is, Tennessee coming crunch time in March and February. This is Rick Barnes all over, how he does all over again. Some of that's fair because, yes, Barnes, we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, Gene, has not had a good track record in March. But you're also not going to be playing NCAA tournament games in a true road environment. They're neutral sites. The SEC tournament is a neutral site. You're not going to have 19,000 screaming fans who are booing Santiago Vescovy every time he touches the ball. You're not going to have the I can't hear myself think type of loud noise going on in a SEC tournament or NCAA tournament environment. So I just think there's a lot you can kind of throw out from this game, and there just was a lot that I wasn't up in arms over it like I saw some people. And I think that just is the nature of social media, Gene. People like to say the sky's falling after any one just negative thing happens. But it was disappointing, and there were plenty of critiques to have for Tennessee's offense specifically. But Arkansas also has a really good defense. We talked about it on the podcast last week that they came into this game as the number 1 defensive efficiency team in the SEC, in SEC play, according to Ken Palm, and that held true. I mean, their defense was really good. Tennessee turned the ball over 15 times in that game. I mean, they disrupted Tennessee really well, and it also helped that they were playing in front of their home court, in front of their home crowd, which is, I mean, they've only lost one time all year. It was to Vanderbilt. I don't know how that happened, but Bud Walton was a great home environment for Arkansas. So I was disappointed with the result, and especially with the offense. But I don't know, Gene. I wasn't up in arms over it like some people were. And again, that was a minority. But I did see some reactions. I thought, all right, let's talk about this one on the podcast with Gene.
Yeah, and so I'm sitting here looking at the first half box score. If you're going up against a team that's really good defensively, you got to have guys that make plays. And your starting point guard has 3 fouls in the first half. Mm-hmm. That's a killer because he can create. And I'm box. I hate being the box score person, but Ziegler, same thing, 2 fouls in the first half. I don't know all the details of it all, so I'm apologizing if I'm coming a little ignorant from it. But when I see 4 guys are in foul trouble in the first half, that hurts, man. That hurts what you're trying to do. I mean, Chandler's a guy who's so hard to guard that you can get a lot of stuff. You can get a lot of stuff at the basket or however it needs to be, however you need to create offense with just him. And some of that was Ziegler as well. And so when you don't have those 2 guys who are just creators, now you're really trying to figure out offense. And, of course, in the second half, because of, the inconsistency of the calls and charges being called left or right and all, you can't get into a flow.
Yep.
And that hurts a lot of what you're trying to do. I mean, you're afraid to attack the basket. You don't know what they're going to call. Or then, you're in foul trouble, so you can't be as aggressive as you want to be, and it hurts. I think kind of like you. I mean, it's not one of those cases where there's nothing. I understand that everybody wants to win every single game. I understand that fans get really excited about wins and they get really down about, well, they get really excited about big wins. They get really down about big losses. But everything that you're doing in the regular season is getting you prepared for what's going to occur 2 weeks from now. And that's what truly matters. Like, obviously, look, it would be huge if they won Saturday. And we'll talk about that there, here in a little bit. It would be huge if they won Saturday. It would not be, it would not be tragic if they lost. It would be tragic if they lost and lost like a key player.
Yep.
But otherwise, if you go out there, you have a really good performance, and Auburn's just a better team, then just accept that Auburn's a better team. And like, when you and I talked in the preseason, we both were kind of just wondering out loud what we thought this team could be. Didn't we both say this is about a 9-10 loss team?
Yep. Somewhere between 8 and 10 losses.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said like 21-10, 22-9. Where are they at right now?
Right on track for that.
Yeah, so not every single game is going to look bad. And when you look at just their losses, I mean, let this sink in. Their worst loss is Alabama.
Yeah.
By most any metric. I mean, you can probably argue LSU now, but
not at the time.
Yeah, like on the season, like their worst loss is Bama.
Yep, and you got to remember too. That was down on the road, but Tennessee was down 2 guys to COVID in that game too.
Yeah, and like, I mean, if you just want to go by nerdy metrics, Villanova 12, Texas Tech 6. Bama 20, LSU 18, Kentucky 2, Texas 14, Arkansas 19. Those are your losses. You also have a win over Kentucky. You got a win over LSU. You got a win over Arizona. Like, this has been a really good team all season long. Mm-hmm. Are they winning every game? No. Are they number one in the country? No. But do you feel comfortable about the ways this team can win games in March? Because usually I'm always a big advocate of, you got to have experienced players who have been through the wars, and maybe like a dynamic point guard who can just create a lot of stuff. I was the dummy who 2 years ago wrote how Victor Bailey was the key to the season going into the 2021 season. He's been very up and down, but when he's been good, he has been pretty good.
Yeah,
be clear, and that's a senior, and you win with those guys in March. It's like a 5th-year senior or a 5th-year junior or something like that. Whatever he is, he's experienced.
Right.
He's been in the NCAA tournament before. He's played in the NIT before, or whatever the breakdown was. He played for Tennessee last year, so he's been in multiple tournaments. So you've got that. You've got a guy like Fulkerson. You've got guys, even Josiah, guys who have been in the program and understand what's being asked of them. And then you throw in a guy like Chandler who can go out there and be dynamic in March, and you have a chance. I mean, is it perfect? Do you have offensive flaws? Yeah, of course you do. But you also have guys that you feel comfortable can go out there and compete and win in March. And to your point, everything's neutral site.
Mm-hmm.
After March 5th, everything's neutral site. And the last time I checked, Tennessee travels. Tennessee travels. And so, I know Kentucky always like to say blue gets in. I was at that Tennessee-Kentucky game in Knoxville 3 years ago. Blue could not get in. Orange is starting to let itself into the building now. So, there's enough excitement around the program. And, social media doesn't speak for everyone. It's not even always a clear consensus. But, when you just look at where this team is, I'm going way off the rail. I'm not talking too much about Tennessee, Arkansas, because to me, look, I was the one who yelled it would be nice to see them get a win of that magnitude, because they have not been a quality team and beaten a quality team on the road in a long time. 50 years. And so I think it would have been nice to get. They had chances, and you can point to the charges, you can point to the poor shooting, you can point to the foul trouble keeping guys out of rhythm. But the fact of the matter is, like going forward, you still feel comfortable about this team's ability to compete night in and night out. They don't just not show up. I think that's clear. Like they may have a bad offensive showing, but they don't just not show up. And I've seen teams that just, Tennessee, Wisconsin 3 years ago. That team just, the game after Lamonte retired, that team just didn't show up. Now they were disheveled or whatever, but this team, when have they just not shown up? Villanova, maybe. Texas Tech was overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Bama, they're down 2 players. LSU, they had moments. Kentucky, they look one of their best offensive games of the season. Texas came down to a point. In Arkansas, we're just talking about it. They're going to show up. And what you want, what college guys want is they want guys who are going to compete every time they step out on the court. And this team does that. And if they continue to do that, they're going to have a chance in every game they play. Because you don't question their effort. You may question their offense. You don't question their defense. You don't question their effort. And those are 2 things that translate into March.
Yeah, and to talk about March before we look ahead to this Saturday's game, because you're right. Because I don't want to beleaguer the point on either the Missouri or Arkansas games, because we're getting to the point where, yes, we can talk about these individual games a lot, but we're getting to the point where, like you said, especially right now is big preparation time for the time it matters most, where we're about to be the end of the regular season and getting to tournament play. And I've seen multiple projections that even with that Arkansas loss, like Tennessee's still being projected by a lot of places as a 3 seed and a 4 seed by it's a mix between 3 and 4, but a lot of places still have Tennessee as a 3 because, as you mentioned, they have quality wins and they don't have a bad loss. Like they're one of 3 teams in SEC that doesn't have that all their losses are quad 1. Like they don't have a quad 2 or worse loss. Like all of Tennessee's losses have been what you call a quality loss. Like they don't. If you look on the little graphic you'd see on ESPN, like quality wins, bad losses, Tennessee would have 0 bad losses. Like you said, their worst ones are Alabama and LSU, and those aren't bad. Those are teams that are making the NCAA tournament. I mean, LSU, they got to be careful. If they keep losing, they may not, but that's still a team that, especially at the time when Tennessee played them, they were playing their best ball. It wasn't until kind of late January when they started to fall off, and really kind of when the second time the 2 teams played is when LSU was really starting to have their pitfall because Pinson was hurt, and I think they had somebody else that was hurt for that game too. But I mean, Tennessee doesn't have a bad loss. They may have had ugly losses in terms of the deficit. Like the Villanova loss was ugly because Tennessee barely put up 50 points and gave up 71, and it was a double-digit loss in that game. Arkansas was ugly because you only scored 48, but you held them to 58. I mean, there's some ugly losses in that regard, but there isn't a bad one to a bad team. Whereas, you look at years past, the only other team, Gene, I can think of in the Rick Barnes era that didn't have a bad loss was that team. If I remember correctly, I'll look at the schedule, but it was the team that was number 1 for a month. I don't recall them having. I'll go back and look. I don't recall them having a bad loss. I'm going to pull up the schedule because the only ones I can think of were LSU and Auburn. Let's see. They lost to Kansas in overtime, which Kansas was good that year too. They were number 2 at that point when they played them. Lost to Kentucky, lost to LSU, lost to Auburn twice in regular season and in the SEC final, and then SEC tournament final, and then again the last loss was to Purdue in the Sweet 16 in overtime. So they didn't have a bad loss. I mean, those are all very quality opponents that they lost to that year. I want to check the year prior, the one that won the share of the SEC regular season title, because I don't recall them having a bad one. They lost to Villanova, which at the time was number 5 team in the country. They lost to Arkansas in overtime. Sorry, what was that?
They lost to Georgia.
Yes, you're right. They did lose.
They lost to Georgia.
Stegman. And Stegman has just been a house of horrors for Tennessee for whatever
reason. They lost to Bama that year too. I'm looking at it strictly from the numbers perspective, and Bama was finished the year 57.
And they lost to Missouri that year, which they weren't horrible.
Missouri was 40. Good. Yeah, Missouri finished 40.
They lost by almost 30 to Alabama. I forgot about that game.
Yeah. So I'm just glancing here. 11 at Georgia.
Really, that plays into my point. Like, this is only, barring Tennessee losing to Georgia and Stegman here in a week. This will be only the second time in the Barnes era, and really the second time in the last decade plus that Tennessee hasn't had a bad loss. Again, counting that team that went number one for a month, that this would be the only time, again, knocking on wood, that Tennessee doesn't lose to Georgia here in a week, or doesn't lose in their first game in the SEC tournament. But barring any of that happening, this would be the first time and the second time in the last decade that Tennessee hasn't had a bad loss in their resume. So, this is not a bad team. And to get to the point I was trying to make, and I got sidetracked myself, was that a lot of projections I'm seeing have Tennessee as a 3 or 4 seed. And I saw one that was from, I want to say it was Heat Check, maybe 3-Man Weave. It was one of those. I quoted it from the Vol Hoops Fever Twitter account. So let me go pull it up really quick. But they had projected tournament wins, and they had it listed by who has the most projected tournament wins. I think Gonzaga was number 1, which not a shock on that one. Auburn was up there too, but Tennessee was up there in the top 10, and they had it projected as having slightly more than 2. So it basically mostly between 2 and 3, but closer to 2 wins, which 2 wins in the NCAA tournament as a 3 or 4 seed is getting you to a Sweet 16, which Tennessee has not done a ton. They've done more in the past 20 years than they had in the previous 20 before that. But I said this on Twitter. If you told me right now, without any further details in terms of who they're playing or if they're down any guys or anything like that, but if you told me right now that this team gets to the Sweet 16, I would take it. I know I would 100% be heartbroken if we get to that point and Tennessee is a possession away from going to the Elite Eight and doesn't make it. But I would 100% take a Sweet 16 for this team right now, Gene. Yeah, here it is. It was by Heat Check. Tennessee was ranked, I guess technically, actually 11th for projected NCAA tournament wins at 2.17, and they're projected as a 3 seed on this one right now on the Heat Check one at the time for their bracket tournament index that they do with I think it's Hardwire Sports is what they kind of look at there. But Gene, I would again, I know this is a month, or I guess a month from now, my feelings may be different, but Tennessee, this team gets to a Sweet 16, I don't know, I would be satisfied. I think that is a satisfactory outcome for this team given the roster and everything, and this team has the potential to do that, and they do, depending on the matchups in the tournament, have the potential to get to an Elite Eight. It's going to really genuinely depend on Tennessee's seeding, who they're in the bracket up against, because you get to that 3 seed. I'm having trouble remembering how the brackets work, but if you get to the 3 seed, I think it's you don't play the 1 seed until you would get to that actual bracket final. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly, Gene? Or do you know off the top of your head? I'll look at the brackets in a second.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I was looking at something else, man. Can you repeat that question for me?
Yeah, and I think actually I just answered myself. So yeah, if Tennessee if you're a 3 seed, you wouldn't have to play the 1 seed until you get to to the Elite Eight, to that final of the bracket. You'd be matched up likely with the 2 seed of that bracket, which is much better. That's why Tennessee, if they can get a 3 seed, perfect. 4 seed, it's fine, it's okay. That's still a potential Sweet 16 I guess pathway there, and then potentially getting to the Elite Eight there. But I think if Tennessee can get a 3 seed, that would be phenomenal for them, and that sets up likely potentially better than a 4 seed of getting to an Elite Eight and getting past the Sweet 16 berth for Tennessee.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in this year, I mean, are we sure that there's 4 legit ones?
Right. This year's so crazy. That's the thing too.
Yeah, there's usually 2 or 3 legit ones. Sometimes there's an argument that there's a 5th team that should have been number 1, but usually it's 3, and the 4th team is everybody has scars, has marks, and they pick a team, and the first number 2 is just real mad about it. But when you look at just what this team is, I mean, this team is built for any and all circumstances. Their quality, they're good. I mean, that's not a team that's going to get rattled. I mean, just look at the guys, look at the makeup of the guys on that team. You've got guys, your point guards are from, your point guards are built. I talked to a coach a few years ago that was telling me that he wanted to go recruit guys from tougher areas because they've been through more. And I mean, when you look at just the 2 point guards of this Tennessee team, you're talking about Kennedy Chandler, who grew up in Memphis. We talk about Zakai Ziegler, who everybody knows everything about this kid's story because Mike Wilson of the Knoxville Sentinel did such an amazing job encapsulating just what that kid's been through. They're not going to flinch. Like, they may get beat, but they're not going to flinch. And I wouldn't care if this team's a 4. I wouldn't care if this team's a 3. Like, you may beat them. I listened to a podcast where one of the guys is talking about certain people, and one of the guys he talks about is Mick Cronin, and he's always like, "Man, you don't beat Mick Cronin, you have to kill him." And it's just completely funny, just because you watched how that UCLA team battled last year. But like, I mean, and that's just kind of what the Tennessee team is. This is a team that you're not going to just beat them. Like, you're going to have to, like, literally, like, kill them. And they'll still feel like they have a chance, even when it's all said and done, because they're just that talented. They're that tough. They've all been through so much. I mean, like, look at a guy. I mean, I think the definition of toughness, to me, is Joe Fryer. Like, a guy who, I mean, when you just look at it, you're talking about a guy who literally had to deal with the social media storm of his early season. So he wasn't hitting shots,
Yep.
and things of that nature. People were all pissed off whenever because he didn't hit the shot against Texas, and he responds. That's toughness, man. That's tough, because like a lot of guys would shrink in that moment after they have a moment that plays out on national television that everybody has a chance to see. He instead, has played well. Look at John Fulkerson, a guy who everybody likes to make a little joke about how old he is, everything he's gone through. Just what his career, his trajectory has been all over the place. To go from budding freshman to to just a hustle mania guy, to an all conference player, to now more of a role player, because like more bigger, better, more talented players have come in, and he just accepted that. But that takes pride, and that takes toughness to be able to handle it. If you just look at the guys on this team, they've all been through a lot. I mean, Victor Bailey, the social media storm when he couldn't hit shots. I mean, Justin Powell's going through it right now, in an extent, because he's a young kid and he didn't play well against Arkansas, and didn't play at all last night in a game that they held. They pretty much controlled.
Yep.
So you just look at the guys on this team, like I said, that this is what you're trying to build. This is what they built 4 years ago, in that 18-19 team that won 26 games. Or I'm sorry, 17-18 team that won 26 games. Whichever, 17-18 team that was so successful. Like, it's a team that's built on toughness. It's a team that's built on, small, quick guards. I think back then it was Bone, Turner, and number 3, the graduate transfer kid.
Ian
build
Daniel?
on those 3. Yeah, James Daniel. It's built on those 3. And then, like, you've got your post, who's, obviously, a budding superstar, and Grant Williams. You've got toughness all over the court, and they've got that now. I mean, they've got it now. Like, you can't say enough about where they are now as a team. I understand the wins. I understand they're not number 1 in the country. I completely understand that. I understand, one of your former coaches has quickly built a really successful program, but 4 hours down the road. I understand all that stuff. I understand that, but everything is about building for right now. Everything's about building for March. And you have a team, like, you're probably not going to face Auburn unless it's one of those, like, Final Four, Elite Eight scenarios like Kentucky and Auburn a few years ago. You're not going to face that team for 4 rounds. Kentucky would be the same thing. That would be just one of those weird just scenarios where the two teams have won 3 games, and some of the teams that you may come up against, some of the SEC teams you may come up against, you won't come up against them for a while. The teams that have given you problems at times, you won't have to see them for a while. Can you beat a UTC in the first round of the tournament? You get past them. Can you beat a 5 seed. I'm trying to think of who a potential 5 seed would be. Can you beat a team of that caliber?
Yeah,
Can you go
I'm
to the
looking at
Sweet
the bracket matrix right now, and here's who they have as between a 5 and a 6 seed currently on a bracket matrix: Texas, Alabama, Tennessee's played already,
Of course.
Ohio State, Connecticut, Arkansas, and LSU, then USC and Michigan State. Those are kind of the 5 and 6 seeds right now. So again, like half
Everybody
of those are
wants to
teams
play
Tennessee's
Michigan
played.
State, man. Everybody wants to play Michigan State right now. They do. I don't know why, but everybody wants to play. I mean, a lot of people have not seen Tom Izzo's movies if they want to play Michigan State in March. I would not be trying to see them early on, but that seems to be a lot of people's trendy 5-12 pick. But yeah, I mean, like that's can you beat a team of that caliber? I think it's possible.
Yeah.
And if you can win 3 games, that gets you to your second Elite Eight, to where you can face a team. You can face a Kentucky team. Guess what? You split with them.
Yep.
You split with them. I mean, details don't matter. I understand they were missing a key player. Not here to argue that. Not here to dispute that. What I know is that the 2 teams played. There were a lot of people. They kept score, and Tennessee won. So, like, everything is about being built. And this is a team that's tough. This is a team that's hungry. And I think you come to a point. Well, I mean, the SEC does such a good job of scheduling where all these games are so important and they're so big in caliber. I mean, they're so huge in terms of just how big these games are. It's a week left in the season and you're playing Auburn. You get an extremely high-profile game where you have an opportunity to really, build that resume. You win Saturday, all of a sudden you're in the conversation for a 3. You sweep next week, who knows? But instead of a 3, now all of a sudden maybe you're sneaking up towards the 2. And if you go 2-1, and those 2 are say Arkansas and Auburn, that's a different conversation. And so that's what's been built. That's what's been created here. I mean, Georgia's not going to do anything for you. Their coach has got like 15 minutes left. Honestly, at this point, quite literally about 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
And then who knows what you have in the tournament. Who knows what you get in the SEC tournament. But if you have 22 wins, 8 losses going into the SEC tournament, maybe you can win 2 more. Get you to 24-9. Maybe you win it out and go 26-8. Whatever the case may be. Now you have a resume with some really quality wins, because if you're going to win the SEC championship, the tournament championship, you're going to have at least 2 quality wins back onto that resume.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points, and I agree with a lot of what you said, and it's just also this just crazy to me. Like looking at the bracket matrix again, which if y'all don't know what the bracket matrix is, it's a site that compiles like a lot of major kind of bracketology things out there. So ESPN and Jerry and Palm, but like it's not just those guys. It has a bunch of other ones who do bracketology stuff and are like well thought of and well known, like Hasametrics, who I've talked to a lot of different times on when I worked at Rocket Top Insider, and I think had him on here once before. I don't remember. But anyway, just looking at the 3 seeds, like the 1, 2, and 3 seeds, like basically the top 12 teams in their bracket. And Gene, like half of them are teams that Tennessee's played. Arizona and Auburn, who Tennessee's about to play. Those are both 1 seeds. Kentucky's a 2 seed. Texas Tech's a 3 seed. Villanova's a 3 seed. So it's just like all these teams that Tennessee's played that are going to be 1, 2, and 3 seeds. It's just like, I mean, Tennessee, just to reiterate, has not had a bad loss and has played a really high quality schedule and has played some really high quality opponents all season. And yes, they've played weak opponents, but right now looking at the net rankings, which is what the selection committee really uses as a big tool to judge the value of a team, Tennessee's 9th right now in the net. And actually, before Auburn plays their game against Ole Miss tonight, Gene, Tennessee's ranked right ahead of them. They're 9th, Auburn's 10th. And then who's ahead of Tennessee? Number 8's Villanova. Number 7's Texas Tech, who Tennessee played both those teams this year. So, I mean, they're right there with the teams they have played against and either lost to or have beaten. They beat Arizona, who's currently number 2 in the net. They've split with Kentucky, who's number 3 in the net. So, I mean, they've played consistently some really good teams, as you mentioned, teams that if they make it to the Sweet 16, teams like that will be ones they'll have to play. Maybe not in the Sweet 16, but getting in the Elite Eight. If they get that far, they'll be playing a 1 or 2 seed at some point in the other Sweet 16 or Elite Eight. So like you've mentioned, like they've played these teams already, and they've beaten some of these teams already, and they're more than capable of beating the teams they'll have to beat to get to that Sweet 16. So we're looking ahead, and that's maybe more of a conversation to have once we get out of the regular season. But I'm with you. Like my opinion of this team hasn't changed drastically since they've finally seems like they've figured out quite a few things. They're not a perfect team by any means, but they've figured out a lot between now and when we were talking about this team in a month ago in late January. They figured out a lot about themselves. Really quickly, I don't want to spend too much time because we've already talked for quite a bit on here. I do want to preview a little bit of the Auburn game and look ahead to that because it's going to be fun. I'm not. We're recording this before Auburn plays Ole Miss. I'm not expecting that to be a game. It's Auburn at Auburn. They're really good at home. They're playing Ole Miss, who's not a great team. But Gene, I will say, well, I have a lot of concerns about the way Tennessee's front court will match up with Auburn in this game. Auburn's guard play it's still good. Don't get me wrong. It's still a solid guard unit, but it's not the guards of years past with Auburn like you think of. With the a couple years ago with Jared Harper, for example. Like it's not those types of guards. Still, Katie Johnson, dude's a maniac. Like he's a high energy, very passionate player. Wendell Green is a really good, again, he's kind of like a Kennedy Chandler or Zakai Ziegler in terms of his stature, 5'11". Katie Johnson's 6'1". Like they're going to have a couple small guards to match up with Tennessee's small guards in this game, and they're from Atlanta and Detroit. So again, talk about coming from places that you grew up and have that really good the attitude that you want a point guard to have and just a guard in general to have. But this team is not a lot of times when you think of Auburn over the last few years under Bruce Pearl, it's a jacking up a bunch of threes and scoring that way. This team has not been good at shooting 3-pointers. On the year, they're shooting just 32%. And in SEC play, it's just 29%. I guess 29.5%, whatever. Clearly, obviously, though, this year's team is a different makeup because of Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith. They're the number 1 2-point offense in the SEC. They still shoot a lot of threes relatively to how bad they are at making them, but they have the number 1 2-point percentage offense in the SEC play. They've hit almost 55% of their twos in SEC play. They have the number 2 scoring offense in the SEC. They're averaging almost 9 blocks per game in the SEC because Walker Kessler is blocking 5 per game in SEC play. They rebound really, really well because they have a 7'1" and 6'10" post players who are both really athletic and really dynamic. They have number 1 number 1 rebounding. They're number 1 in defensive and number 2 in offensive rebounding per game in SEC play. So this is a really good team, Gene, but they've also, and I haven't actually looked it up just yet. I'm about to, but I know from the quote unquote eye test, this team has struggled a lot on the road. All their losses, all 2 of them, I guess besides the Connecticut one earlier in the year, that was a neutral site, but in the SEC play, both their losses have been on the road, and they've struggled. They didn't play well against South. This is earlier in the year, but they didn't play well against USF on the road. They didn't play well against St. Louis on the road. They struggled against Alabama. That's a good team, but they struggled really badly against Missouri. They struggled really badly against Georgia. I mean, this is a different team on the road than they are at home. They've not looked great on the road this year. They didn't play well against. I mean, they played okay against South Carolina. If I remember that game, it was one that they pulled away late on. But they've really not had a great time on the road this year. They've been buoyed a lot by the fact that they've played just exceptional at home. They're undefeated, and the vast majority of those games haven't been that close at home. I mean, their closest win at home is against Kentucky, and they pulled away late in that one and won that one by 9. And that's the closest home game they've had all year, Gene. So they've been in a really good home team, but lately they've not been playing their best ball as of late, and they struggle on the road. I still feel really nervous about how many of these analytics sites and stuff have Tennessee winning this game. I don't know if I'm ready to predict Tennessee to win this one, but this is a game that if Tennessee can get anything out of Adu and Urosh maybe, or anything out of Adu and one other post player that can just be a guy out there that can do something that isn't like turning the ball over every time he touches it, if they can get something from two post players on, especially AD on defense, if they can get just a little something from a post player on offense, I feel pretty good about this one. It's going to be a fun game. The crowd's going to be insane for that one, as insane as a Kentucky game, because it's a top 5 opponent in Auburn. It's Bruce Pearl back in Knoxville again, with this time with a full crowd. So it's going to be a fun one, I think, and it's going to be a game that I think both teams get into probably into the 70s in. But Gene, I have a decently okay. I have a better feeling about this game than I did 2-3 weeks ago. I really do. I feel a little bit better. I feel quite a bit better actually about this game than I did 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm still not quite ready to say Tennessee wins it, but it's going to be close. Every analytic, even the ones that predict Tennessee to win, have it as like a 1 or 2 point game, and it would not shock me if it came down to, the final 2 possessions of the game for whomever in this one.
Yeah, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, some of those teams in the past were built off of bigs. I'm sorry, off guards. Mm-hmm. The Auburn teams, and like I still remember the SEC championship game from 3 years ago in Nashville, where they basically just spread. They literally just spread that team out the entire game. They just hit 3 after 3 after 3, and it was such a bad look. I mean, not bad look, but it was just such a bad game for them. And this team, I'm sitting here just looking at it, and these aren't perfect stats, but you take out quite possibly the best player in college basketball, Jabari Smith, and there's not really anybody that scares you from deep. So they have a really talented 1-2 combination in Smith and Kessler. Their guards are yeah.
I like their attitudes. I'm not sure about as much of their skill set, but man, I love Katie Johnson and Wendell Green's attitudes and the way they play. It's going to be fun seeing them go up against Kennedy and Zakai.
Yeah, they're tough guys. But I feel like that's a position where Tennessee kind of has an advantage, mm-hmm. and Tennessee shoots it well at home. And if they're hitting shots, they are tough to beat. And that environment gets going, and when Bruce Pearl comes to town, that's already a more emotionally charged environment for obvious reasons. So, I think, it's going to be a really fun game to watch. Just because, there's just so much. There's not really a ton on the line. Look, man, you try to tell people, hey, you won an SEC championship 3 years ago. They tell you it was a regular season championship, and who cares? And so, it's not like it's really, a regular season game. But it's not one of those games where it's like, man, we can win the championship, because I've been told that those things don't really matter in basketball, especially in the SEC. And so, for me, I'm just looking at it as it's a great game that is going to be amazing to see on television, and for the 20,000 or so people that make it, it's going to be a great environment. And, you certainly hope that they go out there and, I can't talk enough about Tennessee's ability and their desire to compete every single time they step out on the court. And I'm looking forward to hopefully getting a chance to see some of that, because I think it's going to be, hopefully it's high-level basketball. Hopefully it's certainly going to be, I think, a good game. And that's what I want to see, because that's what basketball is this time of year. It's you wanting to see the high, the high octane games. You want to see the games in the 70s. You want to see dunks and threes. You want to see somebody have a great performance as you go into the last week of the regular season. And this could be the game that somebody that you see a Chandler really break onto the scene, or even more so, because he's had great games, but this is the high profile game where somebody kind of really is introduces themselves, gets draft people excited. Tennessee doesn't have anybody that gets you draft excited yet. Doesn't get the Chad Fords and people like that. But Gavoni, Draft Express guy. There's nobody on this team that gets you really excited there. But say Kenny Chandler goes 28-10 on a stage like that. He's right now their best prospect for the next level. he does that, and all of a sudden now you got the buzz back around this program again. Like, they're winning a lot, they're not losing to bad teams, but there's the buzz, the national buzz is not there. And this will be the type of game that will bring it back to this program.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a big time game, and Tennessee they've won a couple of those, but this would be, like you said, the national spotlight's going to be on this game. Tennessee hasn't won one on a Saturday in a while, because obviously the Kentucky game was a big victory for Tennessee, but it was on a Tuesday night at 9:00, which was great for the TBA environment, but it was kind of bad from the respect of, late night game on ESPN. Like, I'm sure that was really well watched. I haven't seen any numbers on it or anything, but that was the Super Tuesday stuff, so I'm sure it was well watched. But this is being on a Saturday and a pretty good time slot too. So there's a lot to watch for in this game. I would say there is a lot riding on it, but there's also, again, like, unless Tennessee falls off the face of the planet in the last couple weeks, or last 3 games of the regular season, they're going to get a top 4 seed. And you would prefer to be, I don't know, because the way I don't know, because the way that middle of the SEC standings is right now, it's really hard to predict who's going to get what. My whole thing is, if I'm Tennessee, I want to avoid Alabama and Florida if I can as my first game. If that means being the 4 seed, cool. If that means being the 2 seed, go try to get that. I don't really care what seed Tennessee is, as long as they get the double bye, and as long as their first game isn't against an Alabama or Florida. And try to avoid Auburn as long as you can. That's why maybe getting the 2 or 3 would be better than the 4, because you don't have to worry about playing Auburn in the semifinal if that's the case. Because I don't see Auburn not winning the SEC at this point. Unless, again, they lose to Tennessee and then they lose to Mississippi State or something here in their last couple games, and then Kentucky goes on to win it. But regardless, Tennessee's top 4. There's a decent amount riding on this game, but there's also, it's not like the end of the world if Tennessee loses, or the end of the world if Auburn loses. So it's exciting, though, and it's a game that I'm very personally am very excited about, and I know a lot of people listening to this are very excited about. A chance to beat Bruce Pearl is always a nice chance, and always a nice game, and a nice feather to stick in your cap, because, well, Rick Barnes hasn't done it a whole lot, and not just Tennessee, but at Texas, if you want to go back that far too. Rick Barnes does not have a good track record against Bruce Pearl just in his coaching career, period. But Gene, that'll be, I think, where we close out this episode. It'll be right around just under an hour. It's one of our shorter ones over the past couple months, really. But do want to thank all of you again for listening, watching, wherever you are, if you're listening to it on your podcast app of choice, or watching it on YouTube / listening to it there as well. Really, thank you all so much. Be sure to check out the video breakdown of the Auburn game coming up. It should be out on Friday sometime, of the matchup breakdown video. I do before every SEC game for Tennessee, to give you a preview of the opponent and just a preview of the game in general. So check that out on our YouTube channel as well. I haven't really plugged that a whole lot here on the podcast, so we'll definitely do that, just in case some of you don't know I do that on the YouTube channel, which is just Vol Basketball Fever, just like the podcast is. So be sure to check it out. Should have hopefully a Lady Vols Basketball Fever podcast episode coming out here in the next couple of days as well. I meant to do one last week. It schedule-wise didn't work out, unfortunately, with who I was trying to get on. So this week, hopefully, it'll work out a lot better and have some more things to talk about as they're wrapping up their regular season as well. But signing off for Gene, I'm Nathanael. Thank you all so much. This has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.